You know how they say first contact changes everything? Well, they're right, just not in the way you'd expect. When humanity finally joined the Galactic Federation in 2157, we thought we'd be exploring strange new worlds, making groundbreaking scientific discoveries, or at least getting our hands on some fancy alien tech. Instead, we got bureaucracy, mountains of it. Turns out the universe runs on paperwork, filed in triplicate, with a side order of condescension. Commander Alexandra Lex Blackwood stood at parade rest before the Galactic Council, fighting the urge to roll her eyes as Zisith Tal, the Centaurian High Minister, droned on about humanity's fascinating primitive achievements. The council chamber, with its sweeping crystalline architecture and floating holographic displays, would have been impressive if it wasn't currently hosting what felt like the galaxy's most patronizing TED Talk. And thus, given your species' relatively recent emergence from tribal warfare, Zithtal's translator conveyed their whistling speech with what Lex swore was programmed smugness. We believe we have found the perfect role for humanity within our Federation. Here it comes, Lex thought, maintaining her neutral expression through years of practice in war zones where looking unimpressed had been a survival skill. Peacekeepers, Zithtal announced, their bioluminescent patches glowing with what passed for enthusiasm among their species. Your kind's primitive nature and recent experience with conflict makes you uniquely suited for handling lesser disturbances. The other council members, a collection of beings ranging from crystalline entities to what looked like sentient gas clouds, bobbed in agreement. Lex couldn't help but notice they were all stationed safely behind force fields. Apparently, humans were still considered unpredictable enough to warrant security measures, even while being dismissed as primitive. With all due respect, High Minister Lex began, choosing her words carefully, humanity's peacekeeping forces are among our most elite personnel. We've resolved conflicts that... Yes, interrupted Kavor, a floating mass of tentacles representing the Proximan Empire. We've reviewed your crude attempts at maintaining order. Kosovo, Sudan, Afghanistan, all valuable experience for handling the simpler disputes in our less developed sectors. If they only knew what it took to keep the peace in those simple disputes, Lex mused. She'd spent 15 years as a UN peacekeeper, navigating complex tribal politics, diffusing tensions between warlords, and protecting civilians with limited resources and even more limited authority. Her right hand unconsciously touched the scar on her left shoulder, a souvenir from a supposedly simple peacekeeping mission in Sudan. We accept your generous offer, Lex replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, though I hope you'll understand if we maintain our own command structure and methodologies. Of course, Zithtal waved a limb dismissively. You'll be given full autonomy in your assigned sectors. The Galactic Federation doesn't interfere with local customs, primitive as they may be. As Lex left the chamber, her comm unit buzzed with their first assignment. She couldn't help but laugh at the irony these advanced species had just handed humanity exactly the role we needed to prove ourselves. After all, anyone can be a soldier, but it takes someone special to be a peacekeeper. Little did the Council know they'd just put their most volatile sectors in the hands of experts who'd learned their trade in humanity's deadliest conflict zones. And if there's one thing Lex knew for certain, it's that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one carrying the biggest gun, it's the one who knows how to keep the peace, by any means necessary. The emergency alert came through at what passed for 3 a.m. on Nexus 7. Because apparently the universe had a sense of humor about timing. The massive trade hub, normally a gleaming testament to galactic cooperation, had become a case study in how quickly things could go sideways when pirates decided to crash the party. Status report, Lex demanded, striding into the human peacekeeping force's modest command center. The holographic display showed Nexus 7's sprawling commercial district lit up like a Christmas tree, if Christmas trees typically came with hostage situations and plasma weapon signatures. Lieutenant Kira Chen, her communications officer, didn't look up from her console. Pirates hit 3 major trading houses simultaneously. They've got control of the Central Market District and the Atmospheric Processing Center. Local forces are. She paused, searching for a diplomatic term, ... experiencing difficulties. You mean they're getting their tentacles handed to them, Lex translated, watching as another section of the display turned red. The alien military response had all the grace of a bull in a china shop if the bull was wearing powered armor and had authorization to use orbital weapons. The situation deteriorated faster than political goodwill at a UN summit. Within hours, the pirates had entrenched themselves throughout the station's critical systems, taking hundreds of hostages from 17 different species. The alien military forces, led by the proudly militant Arxian Legion, had managed to turn a raid into a full-blown crisis. "They're doing everything wrong," Major Raj Ghosh Patel commented, materializing beside Lex with his usual unnerving silence. The former Kashmir peacekeeper had a talent for appearing exactly when needed and disappearing just as quickly. Standard Arxian protocol, overwhelming force, minimal negotiation. They're treating it like a military invasion. "Because that's worked so well historically," Lex muttered, watching another failed breach attempt on the displays. "How many casualties so far?" 23 dead, 48 injured. Arxians are planning an all-out assault within the next 6 hours. "Which will get everyone killed." Lex pinched the bridge of her nose. "Get me a line to the council. Let's see if they're ready to let the primitives have a shot." The council's response came faster than expected, though Lex suspected that had more to do with the rising body count than any sudden faith in human capabilities. The holographic projections of the council members looked distinctly uncomfortable, as uncomfortable as a sentient gas cloud could look. Commander Blackwood Zith-Tal began, their bioluminescence notably dimmed. "We find ourselves in need of your particular expertise." "You don't say," Lex replied, keeping her voice professionally neutral despite the overwhelming urge to say "I told you so" in several languages. "I assume you're authorizing full human peacekeeping intervention." Under strict oversight, Kavor began, but Lex cut them off. "With all due respect, Minister, we do this our way, or we don't do it at all. I've already got my team assembled." The mention of her team brought a flicker of interest from the council. Lex smiled inwardly. They had no idea what they were about to witness. Within an hour, her core team had gathered in the briefing room. Dr. Zara Khoury, the negotiation expert who'd talked down warlords in Lebanon, was already analyzing the pirates' communication patterns. Lieutenant Magnus Viking Larson, fresh from his last deployment in Afghanistan, was reviewing station schematics with the intensity of someone who'd learned the hard way that details save lives. "Ghost, you've got point on infiltration," Lex addressed Raj, who nodded silently. "Viking, I want contingency plans for every section of that station. Dr. Khoury, find me something to work with. These pirates want something, and it's not just credits." "Already on it," Zara replied, not looking up from her datapad. "Their attack pattern is too specific, too focused on certain sectors. This isn't random." "The Arxians won't like us taking over," Viking pointed out, his accent carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many egos get in the way of solutions. Lex smiled, and it wasn't entirely friendly. "The Arxians don't have to like it. They just have to stay out of our way." The next hour was a blur of preparation, equipment checks, and the kind of detailed planning that came from years of handling situations where one wrong move could spark an international incident. Their gear might have looked primitive to the aliens, no powered armor or energy weapons, but every piece had been tested in the worst conditions Earth had to offer. "Remember," Lex addressed her team as they prepared to deploy, "we're not here to win a war. We're here to keep the peace." She paused, allowing herself a small smirk. "And if anyone gives you trouble about being just peacekeepers, remind them that we learned our trade in places where making a mistake meant starting a war." As they moved out, Lex couldn't help but think about all those condescending remarks from the council. They'd called humans primitive, relegated them to peacekeeping as if it were a punishment. But they'd forgotten one crucial detail: Earth's peacekeepers weren't soldiers who'd never seen war. They were veterans who'd learned to prevent it, contain it, and end it, often with nothing but their wits and whatever tools they could cobble together. The Arxian commander was waiting for them at the deployment zone, his chitinous armor gleaming under the emergency lighting. "This is highly irregular," he began, mandibles clicking in agitation. "My forces are perfectly capable of—" "Your forces," Lex interrupted smoothly, "have already demonstrated their capabilities. Now it's our turn." She gestured to her team, already moving into position with the kind of quiet efficiency that came from experience rather than technology. "Don't worry, Commander. We're just the peacekeepers, remember." As her team disappeared into the station's shadows, Lex allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The aliens were about to learn why Earth's peacekeepers were the ones you really needed to watch out for. After all, anyone can be trained to fight a war, but it takes something special to stop one before it starts. The first thing that struck Ghost as he moved through Nexus 7's maintenance tunnels was how predictable advanced aliens could be. They'd secured every main corridor, every official access point, and every strategic choke point, and completely ignored the service passages that kept the station running. Classic military thinking: focus on the obvious while overlooking the mundane. You'd think he sub-vocalized through the secure comm channel that advanced civilizations would have learned about checking the vents by now. Haven't any of them watched our old movies? Focus. Ghost Lex's voice came through, though he could hear the amusement in her tone. What do you see? The former Kashmir peacekeeper moved like a shadow through the cramped space, his movements refined by years of navigating conflict zones where being seen meant being shot. 3 main groups of hostages. They're keeping them separated by species, probably to prevent any unified resistance. Smart, but it tells us something about our pirates. They've done their homework. Viking chimed in from his position near the station's security center. The Norwegian's voice carried the steady calm of someone who'd spent too many years diffusing tension in Afghanistan's mountain villages. These aren't ordinary raiders. Their positioning, their tactics, they're military trained. Dr. Curry's voice cut in, sharp with insight. That tracks with their communication patterns. Their demands are too precise, too structured. They're following a protocol, but not one I recognize from any known pirate group. Lex absorbed this information while watching the Arxian commander pace nearby, his mandibles clicking in barely contained frustration. The alien military forces had formed a perimeter that was about as subtle as a supernova, complete with powered armor units that hummed ominously. Ghost's voice whispered through the command channel. All charges tagged. Vikings teams are in position. Hostages are prepped for extraction. You know? Please, Dr. Kari's tone could have frozen plasma. Did you really think we wouldn't recognize a military false flag operation? We practically wrote the book on those. Kashmir 2039, Lebanon 2042, Afghanistan 2045. We've seen this play before. The silence on the other end was deafening. When the response came, it carried none of the theatrical bluster of their earlier threats. How did you? Lex's smile turned predatory. Dr. Kari, I believe it's time for that negotiation. Let's show them why peacekeepers are the ones you really need to fear. Dr. Kari's voice sliced through the pirates' comm channels with surgical precision. This is becoming embarrassing, Captain K. Vex. Or, should I say, Commander K. Vex of the 15th Proximan Special Operations Division. Been here for 10 minutes, came the whispered reply. You should see their faces. These pirates have Proximan Special Forces tattoos. Very recent ones. She keyed her comm. Ghost, are you in position? No, Lex agreed, watching as Ghost's handiwork continued to unravel the pirates' composure. What we have is something better: experience. On Earth, we learned that the most effective weapon isn't technology, it's understanding how your opponent thinks. Impossible, the Arxian repeated, watching as the pirates' organized resistance devolved into chaos. Your species doesn't have the technology for this. The pirates' next transmission was cut short by a power fluctuation that left them in darkness for exactly 60 seconds. When the lights came back on, they found primitive human thermal tags attached to their demo charges tags that had somehow appeared despite their security measures. Nothing they can see, Lex corrected. But they're starting to realize something we learned a long time ago. On Earth, the most dangerous predator isn't the one making threats. It's the one you never see coming. By what the Arxian demanded. There's nothing there. Dr. Curry nodded. Their communications are shifting from aggression to defense. They think they're being hunted. Their formation is breaking down, Viking reported with professional satisfaction. They're abandoning outer positions, clustering closer together. Classic siege mentality. The pirates' next execution broadcast never came. Instead, their channels filled with increasingly paranoid chatter about security breaches and compromised positions. Ghost's voice whispered through their command frequency, reciting what appeared to be random numbers, but to a Proximan military officer, they would sound remarkably like operation codes from classified missions. Of course not, Lex smiled. We're just primitive peacekeepers, remember. We couldn't possibly be manipulating your advanced systems. Impossible, the Arxian commander whispered. Our scanners show no human movements in those sectors. Across the station, maintenance panels began opening and closing automatically. Sensor ghosts appeared and disappeared on their tactical displays. The pirates' comm chatter became increasingly frantic as they reported phantom movements and mysterious equipment failures. Viking Lex commanded, "Show them what happens when they ignore maintenance access." The station's environmental controls began cycling seemingly at random, creating pressure changes that would feel particularly uncomfortable to Proximan physiology. The temperature fluctuated in patterns that, to a trained military observer, might suggest a covert team moving through the shadows. Psychological warfare, Dr. Cowrie explained, her fingers dancing across her console. Every species has its pressure points. For Proximans, it's the fear of being exposed. Ghost is currently seeding their secure channels with evidence of their military connections, real or manufactured. It doesn't matter. The doubt is what counts. "What are you doing?" Commander VX Trix demanded. The pirates' next broadcast cut off mid-threat as every light in their sector began to strobe in a seemingly random pattern. Their comms, filled with static that, if you listened carefully, contained whispered voices speaking Proximan military codes, outdated ones that suggested a very specific type of black op. "Music to my ears," Ghost replied, and the comm went silent. Lex nodded, a plan crystallizing. "Right. Time to show these amateurs how Earth handles a hostage situation. Ghost, you're up. Protocol Kashmir." Their communication patterns changed the moment the Arxians attacked. They're not following standard pirate protocols anymore. They've switched to military emergency channels. Sloppy. Dr. Curry. The Norwegian's smile could be heard through the comm. "Environmental controls are ready to dance. Just say when." "Viking, what's the status on our little infrastructure project?" "Better. I've got their supply manifest. These pirates packed enough freeze-dried Proximan delicacies to feed a platoon for a month. Very specific tastes for random raiders." The aliens stared at the humans with a mixture of horror and confusion. Lex ignored them, her mind already running through scenarios. "Ghost, you still have eyes on their demo charges." And instead got 3 tons of his favorite tea, delivered by mistake. Ghost chuckled. "Good times." Viking's voice rumbled through the comm. "Reminds me of Kandahar 43. Remember that warlord who thought public executions would force a military response?" "They're following a script," Dr. Curie spoke up, her eyes never leaving her data screens. "Each execution is precisely timed, broadcast on specific frequencies. They're putting on a show." "What they want," the Arxian commander's translator squealed. "They're killing hostages." "Stop!" Lex's voice cut through the pandemonium like a plasma torch through butter. "You're giving them exactly what they want." The Arxian command center erupted into chaos as the first hostage's life signs flatlined. Commander VX Trix's carapace had turned an interesting shade of purple, his mandibles clicking frantically as he barked orders that would absolutely make everything worse. "Well," Ghost's voice came through the comm, "dry as Saharan sand. I suppose that's one way to start negotiations." "Superior enemy," she shook her head. "Commander, in my experience, the most dangerous person in any conflict isn't the one with the biggest gun or the best position. It's the one who's seen enough war to know how to end it without firing a shot." She checked her comm unit. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe we have some pirates to disappoint." Everything went to hell exactly 3 minutes after the Arxian commander lost his patience. Lex watched through the security feeds as the alien military's precision strike team triggered every single alarm system in their target sector. The pirates' response was immediate and precisely what she'd expected. They started executing hostages. Lex smiled, and for a moment she let him see what lay behind the professional facade, the hard-earned wisdom of someone who'd spent their career preventing wars rather than fighting them. "Commander Blackwood," the Arxian said slowly, "you seem unusually confident for a peacekeeping force facing a superior enemy." Lex watched her team work with quiet pride. The aliens saw outdated equipment, primitive methods, and limited technology. They didn't see the decades of combined experience in handling the worst situations humanity had to offer. They didn't understand that every piece of primitive gear had been chosen because it worked when everything else failed, when the power was out, when the fancy tech was jammed, when lives hung on reliability rather than sophistication. Ghost melted back into the shadows without another word, but not before leaving a small device on the Arxian commander's armor, a simple motion tracker, primitive by alien standards, but proven effective in 100 human conflicts. Viking moved to the tactical displays, his fingers dancing over the controls with the precision of someone who'd planned evacuations under Taliban mortar fire. The way she said just peacekeepers made several nearby alien officers shift uncomfortably. There was something in her tone that suggested she was remembering long nights in Lebanon, talking down warlords while artillery lit up the sky. "They've refused all military communication attempts," Dr. Cowrie corrected gently. "But we're not military, remember? We're just peacekeepers." "They've refused all communication attempts," the Arxian pointed out. "Post continue mapping their positions. I want to know every route they've taken, every supply they've cached. Vikings, start working on evacuation plans when this goes south. I want options that don't involve shooting our way out." "Dr. Curry, you're with me. Time to open a dialogue." Lex gathered her team with a glance. Each of them had seen this moment before, the point where military force gave way to something more subtle, more dangerous diplomacy backed by capability. The Arxian's mandibles worked silently for a moment before he deflated slightly. What do you propose?" "Which is exactly why we're going to handle this quietly," Lex interrupted. "Unless you'd prefer to explain to the Council why you started an interstellar diplomatic incident." "That's not possible," Commander VX Trix protested. "The Proximan Empire is a respected member of the Federation." The revelation hung in the air like a charged particle. Proximan military equipment in a pirate raid? The implications were enough to make the Arxian's antenna twitch. Like a bunch of primitive peacekeepers, Ghost's voice came from somewhere behind the Arxian, causing the commander to whirl around. The infiltration specialist had appeared without a sound, his weathered face bearing the hint of a smile. "Already tagged their demo charges, by the way. Interesting design, Proximan military issue, about 3 years old." Dr. Curry nodded, pulling up a holographic display of communication patterns. Their language choices, their response times, they're anticipating an assault. It's what they've planned for. But throw something unexpected at them. "And they're expecting a military response," Lex finished, "which means they're prepared for a fight, not a negotiation." Weakness, the Arxian commander's translator somehow managed to convey both disbelief and disdain. "They have control of critical systems, superior positioning." Viking appeared next, his tall frame carrying none of the bulk you'd expect from a tactical specialist. Years of peacekeeping had taught him that looking non-threatening was often more useful than intimidation. "We've mapped most of their positions. They're good, but they're following standard military doctrine. That's their weakness." "Is very impressive," Dr. Curry cut in smoothly, emerging from the makeshift command center they'd established. Her civilian clothes stood out among the military uniforms, but her presence commanded attention, a skill honed in countless negotiation rooms. But technology isn't everything. Major Patel has extensive experience in infrastructure assessment from his time in Kashmir. Those skills don't become obsolete just because you add artificial gravity. The Arxian's carapace flushed a deeper blue. "Impossible. Our technology." "Your scanners," Ghost's voice interrupted through the public channel, causing the Arxian to jump, "are missing about 60% of the actual access routes. Also, they've got demo charges on the main life support hub. But please tell us more about your assault plan." "Our scanners show multiple entry points. Those delays are called planning," Commander VX Trix Lex replied, not bothering to hide her sarcasm. "It's this quaint human custom where we think before we act." Commander Blackwood, the Arxian's translator, rendered his clicks into clipped, irritated basic. "My forces are in position for a full assault. These delays are unnecessary." Lex watched the tactical display as the pirates' formation continued to contract. They were running out of options, and more importantly, they knew it. Time to spring the trap. "You know what I find interesting?" Commander K. Vex Lex broadcast openly. "The Proximan Empire is currently negotiating mining rights in this sector. Rights that would be significantly devalued if Nexus 7 were deemed unsafe for commerce." The pirates' comm channels erupted with encrypted traffic. Ghost's infiltration had left their security in tatters, and now their private communications were spilling into open channels. The Arxian commander's antenna twitched as he listened to the translations. This was never about ransom, he realized. "Of course not," Viking confirmed, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen this scenario play out in a dozen different conflicts. It was about creating an incident that would force the Federation to increase military presence in this sector. probably to protect trading interests, which would give the Proximate Empire justification to station warships along vital trade routes. Dr. Cowrie finished. Very elegant, very traditional, very predictable. K-Vex's response was cold. You have no proof. Actually, Ghost's voice came from somewhere inside the pirates' supposedly secure command center. We have quite a bit, including the original orders stored in your personal quantum vault. Impressive encryption, by the way, almost as good as what we used in Sudan. The sound of multiple weapons being drawn echoed through the comms. K-Vex's voice turned dangerous. You're bluffing. No human could access your secure room. Ghost materialized from the shadows directly behind K-Vex. You're right, a soldier couldn't. But I'm not a soldier. I'm a peacekeeper. We specialize in impossible situations. Simultaneously, throughout the station, Viking's teams moved with practiced precision. The hostages were evacuated through maintenance passages and service corridors that didn't appear on any official blueprints. Years of extracting civilians from war zones had taught them that the obvious route was never the safe one. Here's what's going to happen, Lex announced, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who'd talked down warlords with nuclear ambitions. You're going to surrender. Quietly. Your mission will be logged as a failed pirate attack. The Proximate Empire will disavow all knowledge, and everyone gets to avoid an interstellar diplomatic crisis. And if we refuse... Dr. Curry's laugh was not friendly. Then we release everything. The mission orders, the financial trails, the communications logs, all of it dumped straight into the Federation's public records. I'm sure the Proximate Empire would love to explain why their special forces are playing pirate. You wouldn't dare risk. We're peacekeepers, Lex interrupted. Maintaining stability is literally our job description. The question is, are you willing to risk your empire's reputation on the assumption that we're bluffing? The silence stretched for exactly 30 seconds before K-Vex lowered his weapon. Stand down, he ordered his teams. Mission compromise. Initiate Protocol 0. As the pirates surrendered, the Arxian commander stared at the humans with new understanding. You knew, he accused. From the beginning, you knew this was a military operation. Of course we knew, Lex replied, watching as Ghost's team secured the demolition charges. We've run similar operations ourselves. The difference is, we learned something most military forces never do. The most dangerous person in any conflict isn't the one with the most weapons. It's the one, Dr. Curry finished, who knows how to end the fight before it begins. Viking's voice came through one final time. All hostages secured. 0 casualties. Mission accomplished. Just another day at the office, Ghost added, materializing beside Lex with a data crystal containing enough evidence to start several wars or prevent them. Should we bill the Federation for overtime? The Galactic Council chamber felt different this time. The force fields were still up, but Lex noticed the council members seemed to be sitting slightly further back in their chairs. Funny how preventing an interstellar incident could change people's perspectives. Let me be clear, Zith Tal's translators struggled to convey their mix of disbelief and begrudging respect. Your peacekeeping team neutralized a Proximate Special Forces unit, prevented a major diplomatic crisis, and secured all hostages without a single casualty. Well, Lex replied, examining her nails, there was that one broken nail when Ghost had to manually override a security panel. Absolutely barbaric, I know. The council chambers erupted in overlapping translations as various members tried to speak simultaneously. K-Vor's tentacles were practically tied in knots. But you didn't even use advanced weapons, the Proximate representative protested, carefully avoiding any mention of their empire's involvement in the incident. Funny thing about weapons, Lex mused, they're a lot like council meetings, impressive to look at, but not always the most effective way to solve a problem. Dr. Curry, standing at parade rest beside her, didn't bother hiding her smile. Ghost, naturally, was nowhere to be seen, though several council members kept nervously checking their shadows. Perhaps, Zith Tal admitted slowly, we have underestimated the complexity of your peacekeeping experience. You think, Viking muttered under his breath in Norwegian, which the translators helpfully broadcast to the entire chamber. Lex stepped forward, her expression perfectly serious. Members of the council, you assigned us to peacekeeping duties thinking it was a safe, simple role for a primitive species. What you failed to understand is that keeping the peace isn't about being soft. It's about being smart enough to end conflicts before they begin. and dangerous enough to handle them when they do. She paused, letting that sink in. Any species can build a bigger gun. Any soldier can pull a trigger. But it takes something special to walk into a war zone armed with nothing but experience and still walk out with everyone alive. The council chambers remained silent as Lex turned to leave. At the door, she stopped and looked back. "Oh, and do let us know if you need any more simple disputes handled. We peacekeepers just love a good challenge." As her team left the chamber, Ghost's voice came through their private comms. "Think they got the message?" Lex smiled. "If they didn't, I'm sure we'll have plenty more opportunities to demonstrate why Earth's peacekeepers are the ones you really don't want to mess with." After all, she added with a final glance at the nervous council members, "Peace through superior negotiation is kind of our thing." Behind them, the council was already beginning emergency sessions to reevaluate their definition of primitive. Sometimes the best weapon isn't the one that makes the biggest explosion, it's the one that prevents the explosion in the first place.